And there will still, maybe there will still be lightning that awes and inspires us to the majesty of God. And, like in the Great Plains, those rolling storms, you're like, oh my goodness. But no one will get hurt and it doesn't do any damage. I don't fully know, but I think, is it possible that there are still things that inspire us to the majesty of our Creator? For sure, yeah.
And the reason it came up is because these were fishermen who were men who were seaworthy, and obviously have seen storms before and weren't frightened by it, but this storm was so frightening that they were in fear of their lives. And so that's where the conversation began. This had to be a pretty awesome storm.
Yeah. And I guess you could say then that there will be no fear of destruction because, so we could see a storm and not have fear. We could have sub-zero temperatures without fear of our pipes freezing. I don't know, So, I mean, there are options, I think, that allow the continuance of things that are still beautiful and I mean, there's a beauty to storms of different sorts, right? But when that day comes, there will be nothing opposed to the reign and rule of God that still exists. So whatever that means, it's going to be great. The dead are raised, and yeah.
So if that's the case, Pastor, we're talking about the apartment complex that there was sin yesterday because the water main in our lease, in front of our leasing office burst yesterday.
They were sinning?
No, I would say it was sin.
Oh, it was sin. It was sin. They might have been sinning through negligence. You never know. I mean, apartment complexes, you know. All right. So yes, we did get through. But we didn't write down answers. Did we not write down answers? Was that last week? Well, okay. We're going on to chapter 6. All right. I remember finishing 5 and being really excited about doing so. Any other questions up through the end of chapter 5? All right, let's move ahead. Let's move ahead. Yeah, this is, it is small. Let's see. I don't know. Okay, we're just going to rock and roll. That's what we're going to do. All right, so you probably have the text in front of you. If not, I'll scan in when we get to it. But Jesus rejected at Nazareth. So this is still, if you're tracking with the small groups, we're still kind of in that theme of unexpected responses, or you could say unexpected reactions. So this is Jesus in his hometown, and he went away from there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue. Most of the time when Jesus is in the synagogue, there's something like controversial that's going to happen with the Pharisees. It's kind of a place where conflict exists for him. So already the reader of Mark would be, oh, it's the synagogue again. Something's not going to go perfect, right? And many who heard him were astonished, saying, where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? And how are such mighty works done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us? They took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor, we're going to highlight that, except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household. And he could do no mighty work there, except he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. He marveled at their unbelief. And he went about among the villages teaching. So a few things here, or any thoughts right off the bat? Strange, right? His own hometown. This is why pastors, well, never mind. I'm not going to talk about hometowns this time of year. Marlon.
It's just interesting that, word had to got back to his hometown for all the wonderful miracles that Jesus did. But it's just fascinating that there's, I don't know if it's because of envy or they just don't know, but they're just so hard-hearted that that blessing that he's giving out to the world, I'm sure he wanted to give it to his hometown where he grew up, but they were so hard-hearted. It was like, no.
Yeah.
How dare you be better than us? It's like, it's not even about that. But they're so hard-hearted, they can't see that.
How dare you be better than us? Do you think that happens? Or how dare you aspire to be better than us? Maybe not in a city as big as St. Louis, but can you imagine smaller towns in America where that would still be a true sentiment? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Leslie had something?
I think it's sad that that happened in his own hometown, but I think it's very understandable.
Sure.
Because it kind of, I think there's some psyche thing. You know, like when you train somewhere, or in school somewhere, and then you go be a teacher in that same school. You know, it's this. You know, they know him as this kid and this teenager, and then somebody else in a whole different fashion, and then now he's doing something, you know, very inspiring and great. But it's hard, I think, when somebody knows you like that. So it's understandable.
Yeah.
It's sad.
Too big for your britches sort of idea. John?
Just to tell a story about Pastor Village Woodford back in Knoxville. Pastor Z, short for Zorn.
For what?
Short for Zorn.
Excuse you. Yeah.
Pastor Z, the other
I feel like the thing you say at weird last names.
whenever he preached on this, that this was one of his favorite verses, and this was why he still spoke with a Texas twang because he was from Texas, even though he was in New York. I do remember him making the point to us one year in confirmation class about this passage of, well, technically, the whole world was Jesus' hometown.
Sure. Divinely speaking, yes. Humanly speaking, here as we talk about his hometown, so I think you get the idea. If we zoom into a small town in small town Indiana, that's where I'm from, or a small, you can get the similar vibe even today. St. Louis is maybe not quite the same, quite as much, because you could go I mean, maybe it's still true. It doesn't matter, whatever. But his hometown, that's going to be social as much as, if not more than physical. So we're not just talking about the physical area of Nazareth, but even just his hometown, his relatives, don't just think geographically, think relationally, right? The spheres of people that he would have engaged with. It is notable, I mean, if you think about it, we mentioned it maybe in the sermon last week, I think, that there must have been something strange about Jesus for 30 years. So, as opposed to a normal kid who has highs and lows, I don't know. We don't have a picture of it, except to say if he's a little strange now, and Mark points that out, he must have been strange growing up. So, I mean, was there more they should have expected? That this shouldn't have been as unexpected for him to be doing things like this. A few other things. We often talk about Jesus, the carpenter. We'll zoom in there. The carpenter, the son of Mary. Here, the fact that they don't mention his father Joseph probably means that Joseph is dead, right? Otherwise, Jesus would have been connected to his dad, probably first of all, and then maybe his mother. So even just the fact that Mary is named and not Joseph, his sisters aren't named, his brothers are. That kind of idea. Does that make sense? So his father's already probably dead, and we got that in the pericope back in chapter 4. But a carpenter is not a good thing. So we say that, and like, oh, he's good with his hands, and we romanticize it, and he's lovingly, sculpting a wooden. A carpenter is probably an itinerant day laborer. Did we say this last week? This is striking something in me. It's probably an itinerant day laborer. It probably would have been some sort of a shame, if this is true, right? Not if it's true, but if our connection of the word to the actual occupation, it would have been slightly shameful because they would have struggled perhaps, or they would have been going around from job to job trying to raise enough to take care of their family. They couldn't stay in their hometown. They couldn't be rooted and still provide for a family or their household. So a carpenter, and that's kind of played out in this, isn't he a carpenter? This doesn't compute, right? So a carpenter was not a noble thing. They would have been considered shameless persons. As we go on, so they clearly say, where does this man get these things? What is this wisdom given to him? And Jesus said to them, verse 4, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown among his relatives. That's basically a rebuke in the form of a parable, and it would have been seen as insulting. So he's insulting his social hometown and the people he grew up with. And he could not do any mighty works. And we're going to go back to the actual thing here, 1 verse 6. We'll talk about that in a second. But then we see in in verses 5 and 6, he could do no mighty work. Does that make sense to you? Yes and no. I mean, there's reasons for both, right? It does make sense because they had no faith, right? And there are many times where Jesus says, your faith has made you well. Flip side, does Jesus need someone to have faith to do something that alters creation toward the reign and rule of God? and he can do whatever he wants. And we've seen examples of him doing things even when people don't fully understand, right? So it's strange. Like, what do you mean you couldn't, right? Wouldn't you desire to? So this strange, or just a Jesus that can't be categorized neatly, it's kind of, I would say, is coming through here, right? What do you mean you can't do anything? He could do. That's strong language for the Son of God.
Quick question, Pastor. So is that almost a form of judgment?
Yeah.
And I guess that's what's also interesting is that, here Jesus is casting judgment because of their hard hearts.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a permanent judgment unless it keeps his arm on. I guess that's what's almost interesting about that.
Yeah, it's not a permanent judgment, and I think that's true for the world. It's true at other points in Mark. And even if you go back to the prophets, Isaiah comes in here a lot, or Elijah. There are rebukes and there is judgment prophesied, and the judgment happens, but it's never the last word. Judgment is never God's last word, whether it's for the hometown of Jesus or for us. Are we judged? Yeah. And the result of that judgment is our confession every Sunday and hopefully throughout the week. We confess, but is judgment the last word? No. What's the last word from God always? Forgiveness, grace, right? So that's true here too. He marveled because of their unbelief. So the thing here, mm-hmm. Yeah. When we talk about Mark is recording what happened from the mouth of Peter, we presume. And he's just kind of letting it be what it is. And it leaves the reader to say, this doesn't all fit together as neatly as I would have wanted it to, right? Why is he still surprised? This has been going on for 6 chapters. Why is it still a shock to you, Jesus? He marveled at their unbelief. But on the flip side, we can also understand why. Here in the handout, what is most at issue is that in Jesus' day, and still in some cultures, and you hear about this at seminary, and people kind of specify certain cultures, like maybe Eastern cultures have more of this. That honor is a limited commodity. It's finite. So it's a numbers game. So let's say that in this room, and maybe this, and I'm not an expert on sociological studies, but this is, I think, generally true. I know this to be mostly true here. So let's say in this room, how many of us are there? There's 40. So there are 40 parts of honor, right? But then I start doing something. Well, let's not make it me. Let's have it be somebody else. Carol, you start really outperforming at something, and let's make it religious. You're really turning into a prayer warrior. So your honor in our eyes is going up. That means somehow honor somewhere else is going down, right? So because you are really knocking out of the park as a prayer warrior, Leslie's down a peg. So Leslie then gets incensed. But let's say you go up 3 pegs because you're praying and you're I don't know whatever. But so it's Leslie, and then Jack doesn't have any. His honor goes down because yours is going up, right? That's kind of the idea here in Jesus' hometown. His honor is ascending. They're indignant. They're incensed because what does that mean for them? They go down. And I think so. This is where I'd say even like Eastern cultures, yada yada. But even in a small town, middle America, someone's really elevating or ascending, and people get indignant because what does it make them look like? It makes them look less. Does that mean they are? Not necessarily, but that's how they would feel, that you're taking my honor, you're taking my fame. And this kind of ties into the sermon today. Should the church have any give and take in terms of honor? No. In fact, I quoted down here, if I could scan, from 1 Corinthians, I cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and on those parts of the body that we think less honorable, right, less honorable, we bestow the greater honor. And in that culture, at whose expense is that? Potentially yours, right? It doesn't matter. And our unpresentable parts are treated with greater modesty. So there's no division. If one member suffers, all suffer. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. So Paul extends this and expands on this in his letter to the Corinthians, right? Because again, the Corinthians would have only been 30 to 40 years after Jesus ascended to heaven. So the idea of honor would still be the same thing. So this is a countercultural statement that Paul is making, but it's consistent with Jesus. All right, so honor is a limited commodity. Who in the church or in our circles has the least honor? Typically. I do not have an answer in mind. I just think it's worth asking. April? Housekeeping? Sure. Janitorial staff? Mm-hmm. Should they? Should they have less honor? No, especially in the church. Praise God for those who take care of things around here.
I think from a human perspective, the congregation has the lowest honor, and it's the pastor or leadership that has the highest. If you look at churches from a human perspective.
Sure, that's natural because pastors are awesome. No, but I think you do see that in some circles where, well, of course the pastor is the most honorable and everybody else just kind of does what they say, and that's wrong. It's wrong. Yeah. April? Oh, before you say that, sorry, but even the term, I've heard people talk about this, the term layman or laywoman. People say that's just taken like, oh, well, you're a layman. So I don't know if I've intentionally tried, but I've thought about it before, like intentionally not using that. In layman's terms, for the dum-dums, let's not say that because you're not dum-dums, right? We all have equal honor. Am I saying this right, or am I sounding like a jerk? Okay, good. I'll take that with honor.
It just seems like you treat honor as kind of a zero-sum game.
Right.
More than enough to go around.
Yeah, it's unlimited. April, you had a thing, and I'll come to Mike.
Being a pastor's wife, being involved with certain responsibilities as a pastor's wife,
Mhm.
I would just do what I could based on what was going on
Mhm.
at the time. And I scaled back when my mother and my mother-in-law were both passing away, and I took care of both of them. And so I felt good just coming in and making coffee and cleaning up, and I served a purpose, and it all weighed out in the end because the ladies that would take care of that, they had other things going on, and it was just perfect time.
Give and take, and
I never
yep.
felt less, and I just think, when we start measuring, that's where we get into.
Right.
From a judgment and,
Yeah, no, you add it all together. Like, who contributes more? And the answer is nobody, right? But who contributes more for a Sunday morning? The person teaching Sunday school, the one giving the sermon, the one playing the organ, the one making coffee, the one who cleaned the building so we could all worship together in some relative, there's not mouse poop. There's not normally mouse poop. I'm just saying. It's all equal, and the body is working together in a beautiful way. Yeah. Mike, and then Leslie. No, Mike first, then Leslie.
Is it honor or is it respect? I'm a little confused about that. The honor, somebody can come in and do any kind of job and be honorable about it. Do it right or whatever. Do it right. And still be honorable. But I think, I don't know, I'm thinking this as being respectful.
I would.
No respect. No respect.
Sure. Yeah, I'd say honor in this sense would be like value or esteem. So respect, yeah. I didn't say that. I don't know. I'm just trying to value. So honor. I don't. Let me come back to that, or just ask the question again in like 3 minutes. Leslie and then Jack, and then we're gonna move on. Unless we come back to that.
who seems to need less honor, children in our church. I think are definitely something that we have to remember that is easy to do, and of course not. It's not the case, but that's I think that's what people see.
Yeah.
We have to remember that that is something that we can be cognizant of. They're looked at as less honorable.
Right, less honorable, a nuisance, I think there's a balance there. This is just maybe a soapbox. The children are still children. We can't treat them as adults in faith, and yet they are the most valuable among us. That's what Jesus pretty clearly said. So how do we cater to them and recognize their place as a child that needs to be nurtured within the family of faith? I mean, there's always a balance, but I think you're right. And that goes back to, the earliest, in Rome, in Greco-Roman society, again, I've said this, it's not just that children weren't loved. Like, you would presume there were great parents who loved their kids, but the idea more is that children weren't seen as anything worthy of emulation. Like, nowadays we say, oh, the heart of a child, or the joy of a child, that's worthy of emulation. I hope to always hold on to their imagination, their creativity, their joy. There would never have been a conversation like that in the Greco-Roman world. Children were just children. You just disregarded them until they got to be old enough to actually contribute something in the form of like a job, or they just weren't worthy of emulation. So, Jack, we're going to push.
I don't think I'm going to bring up my question.
Okay. Yeah, now I feel like we all want to know. We all want to know.
I wanted to try to define honor. Is honor somebody, oh, they're so great? I don't think that goes along with Christianity or service. If you honor them because they serve well, then honors, I like the word respect better than honor. Honor sort of throws a really accomplished person.
Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write it down in this special book I have. And I'm going to write it down so that this week I will do more of a dive under the idea of honor in the Greco-Roman world and in the early church, like a word study. So I'll have a better answer in terms of what this actually means. I don't think I just didn't foresee this. So we'll study honor. Right.
Police officers, judges,
I will have a really solid 3-minute excursus on this on the 28th. Get it? Right. Yeah. I think the problem that I'll tease out for next week, I think in my mind, so there's the honor societally, right, that I've stated is like a limited commodity. There's also the idea of a prophet having honor, which ties into respect and someone being worthy of listening to. And I think I'm crossing those over, and I'm mixing those up a little bit. So I'm going to clarify that in my own head and bring that back next week. Just have a quick bam. All right? All right, let's keep pushing. Chapter 6, verse 5. Chapter 6, verse 5. Like the woman who touched Jesus' cloak, the picture here is again a little strange and ambiguous. Strange and ambiguous. It's the idea like, okay, well, he couldn't heal anybody. Well, except he did lay his hands on a few sick people and healed them, right? He couldn't do any mighty work. So, okay, well, what's going on, right? That was just, I think we as the readers might see that. The readers of Mark, maybe Mark did this on purpose to say, okay, well, why some, not others? It doesn't, and I don't know that it's worth diving into trying to parse that out too much. All right, so let me go on. Jesus sends out the 12 disciples. And he called the 12, sent them out 2 by 2, and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. Again, what does he first say? Unclean spirits. He doesn't even mention healing things. What have we said before about the Gospel of Mark? The spiritual world is always at the root of the physical world's problems, right? So this is just another example of Mark highlighting that. So, because it will result in people being healed, in verse 13, but it says it gave them authority over the unclean spirits. That's what it says. He charged them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not put on 2 tunics. He said to them, whenever you enter a house, stay there until you depart from there. If any place will not receive you, and they will not listen to you, when you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. So they went out and proclaimed that people should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them. Okay? So this is a little bit of a shift. I mean, it's following in line with what Jesus does, but it's also a little bit different than the Old Testament. Because Jesus is doing what? He is sending them. Centrifugal? There's some words, centrifugal, centripetal, doesn't matter. He's sending them out, but the language of the Old Testament is always, Israel, you will arise again, and people will come to the light of your glory, right? So it's a little different here, that it's not some of the Old Testament in particular. We'll see that with the cross and the resurrection, that people are attracted in the book of Acts, but that's not what's happening here. Jesus is sending them out. It's a little different from like Isaiah chapter 2, Isaiah chapter 60. So they go out 2 by 2. Why do they go out 2 by 2? What is traveling like? Dangerous, right? So there's a component of danger. Especially, we don't tend to, there's still carjackings, but brigands or, what's that word mean? That feels like the right word. Criminals, it's a dangerous thing, so they go out 2 by 2. There's also from Deuteronomy, it says, let there be one witness, right? So for these things to happen, there's a witness for this, when they all come back. So they go out 2 by 2, and they're not going to be self-sufficient, which, well, I guess that could tie into the sermon. That's unexpected. What do you mean? Like we don't take any bread, no bag, no money in our belts? Why not? But they're not self-sufficient. They're going to rely on other people. There is more elaborate footwear. So to wear sandals, verse 9, there would have been more elaborate footwear that might have been better for traveling than what that word is that Jesus used. But you don't get that. 2 tunics were worn by people with distinction. So when John the Baptizer says in Luke, those who have 2 tunics give one to someone who has none. So 2 tunics is not just for warmth, it's a sign of distinction. So you're going to kind of get rid of your distinction. And so this is, again, I would argue, for whatever this is worth, that this description of the disciples going out is strange and ambiguous also. Kind of like Jesus. Because what are they going to do when they get to a house who receives them? They're going to stay there till they depart. So they're not going to be itinerant, just hopping around from house to house every 3 hours with a gospel tract, and then you go to the next one. Stay there until you depart. There's this sense of not being itinerant, and yet they're going out with nothing, with 1 tunic instead of 2, with no money, no bread, no bag. So they're going to look the part of an itinerant preacher, but they're not. They're going to stay unless they're rejected, right? Yeah, maybe tangentially. If they're reflecting the nature of Jesus, to be both fully committed when they're at a place, but also look the part of an itinerant preacher, I don't know if I'd directly connect it. Yeah. So perhaps like Jesus, that's a highlighter, a strange and ambiguous picture of the disciples. I spelled that wrong. Doesn't matter. Neither looking like those with distinction, but neither are they to be itinerant beggar missionaries. So, any questions? All right, let's keep going. The death of John the Baptist. For the sake of time, I'm just going to skip through it really quick. Not skip through it, but we're not going to read the entire thing out loud. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus had become known. Some said John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. But others said he's Elijah, and others says he's a prophet like one of the prophets of old. That's going to come back in chapter 8, right? When Jesus asked the disciples, who do people say that I am? Here's some of the answers. When Herod heard of it, when he heard of all this stuff that's going on, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. Now, what are we to assume with that text? How is Herod actually feeling? Scared, confused, concerned, terrified? There's a lot of, in the Greco-Roman world, the idea of apparitions or hauntings, maybe not exactly like what we think of, but when we get to Jesus walking on the water, the idea of a ghost or an apparition. So yeah, Herod's scared. It was Herod who had sent. It was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. So what do we all immediately know about Herod? He's not a moral, he's not under the reign and rule of God. He married his brother's wife, right? For John had been saying to Herod, it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Herodias, which is an uncomfortable thing to say, isn't it? This ties into the sermon. What was John doing? Speaking the truth to power. And what happens to him for it? He gets rejected and ultimately killed. So this is foreshadowing what our sermon was about today. This text with John is foreshadowing, and I mentioned that maybe in the week 2. So John is doing what Jesus is doing first, basically. Speaking the truth to power and getting killed for it, and then the disciples, that'll happen to them too. But Herodias wanted to kill him. Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man. He kept him safe. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, yet he heard him gladly. It was weird, right? An opportunity came on the birthday. Military commanders leading men of Galilee, verse 22. Herodias' daughter came in and danced. That is scandalous. We had presumed to be scandalous because women would not have been part of the party. So for her to come in and dance, we can just presume it wasn't the sort of dance that I want Kirsten to be dancing, right? There's something not right going on. This is not the reign and rule of God. He vowed to her. He was moved by it. Whatever you ask me, I will give you up to half my kingdom. So this comes into the question of honor again, right? He's given his vow to something in front of his leading men. He's got to follow through. She went out and asked her mother, for what shall I ask? She said, the head of John the Baptist. She came in immediately with haste. So this whole scene, I hope that you see, this entire scene is dark and evil and twisted. And it's probably hard for us to understand it fully when it's not visually done for us. If you think about movies where you're like, where the drama is building and the evil is so tangible that you just cut it with a knife sort of idea, right? That's what Mark is laying out for us here. This is the depths of the twisted and sinister. So Herod is bad. His wife is bad. His wife's daughter is bad. The whole thing is a mess. So with haste she went to the king. So she's just almost like bloodthirsty. That's the way that Mark is trying to give this for us. The king was exceedingly sorry when she asked for his head on a platter. I mean, that's just twisted, right? Who does that? That's, right? But because of his oaths and his guests, he did not want to break his word to her, because his honor would have gone down. And immediately the king sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, gave it to the girl. He didn't even bring it to the party. Gave it straight to the girl. His disciples heard of it. They came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. All right? Yeah, and I mean, you could also, and I put this in the notes here, Mark 6, verses 14 through 29, with these two kings in mind, you have King Jesus, you have King Herod. What are the differences between them? Herod is worried about his status, how he looks to other people. He's worried about maintaining his power. Whereas is Jesus really concerned about what people think of him at this point in time? Not really. No, he antagonizes the Pharisees. He's not worried about his own honor. He's on mission, and his mission ends in death, and he's going to eventually accept it, right? So there's a big difference between the king of the reign and rule of God and the king that is opposed to the reign and rule of God, and those are juxtaposed for us pretty well here in Mark. It also foreshadows John the Baptist's burial. There's a big similarity, even grammatically, between the words used by Mark for John the Baptizer's burial and then Jesus's, when we get to that in Mark chapter 15. So this strong picture, it's just to reiterate, Mark presents a strong picture of life outside the reign and rule of God. It is dark, it is twisted, it is sinister, it is depraved. It also foreshadows Mark 8:30 through end of chapter 10, the unexpected life. Any questions there? All right. Carol. Sure, I like that.
John's disciples got the body and buried him. Did he have his head or not?
Presumably no.
So it was just buried, just the body without the head.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens in the head?
We don't know. We can presume some. I mean, it probably. I mean, if you go back to some of those, I mean, it probably was kept as a trophy, a relic. Yeah. I mean, that goes back to. I mean, this would be synonymous with even like the Babylonians, or more so the Assyrians. The Assyrians would keep trophies of the people they conquered. So when the Assyrians came and conquered, were there other heads of Jews that were kept as trophies? Sure. So again, the whole thing's depraved. And that's really the picture. The whole thing, this is the opposite of what Jesus came to do. right? So, yeah, I mean, there's also a strong here word about the women, and sorry, that was a joke. Huh? Probably. It's like those shrunken heads from Harry Potter, you know? I know, yeah. There's lots of witchcraft, and yeah. So all of those options are on the table. It's depraved, yeah. All right. So the end of the story today: don't behead anybody and keep their head as a trophy. It's good rule for life. We're gonna call that a day. I've noticed. I just want you to know, so that you're not like, well, it's only 10:40. I think that's just gonna be our new stop time, because I noticed, was it last week or the week before, when I stopped at 10:40, I felt remarkably less stressed getting ready for 11 o'clock worship. So I appreciate that, and so thanks for understanding, and it makes things a little calmer. So let's pray. Father in heaven, in line with the theme for the sermon and our small groups in this unexpected life, give us courage like John the baptizer. Courage to speak the truth, courage to hold fast to your promises, courage even to die with honor. We pray that day would not come soon, but instead that your Son would return and raise the dead, raise John with the head as he was always supposed to be. Till that day, keep us in your grace. Amen. Yeah, you got to think John the Baptist will have a head when he gets raised. He'll come back.